and subjective or interpreted reality, meaning reality that is based on concrete facts and reality that is based on people's opinions. Sometimes people act only in response to the facts in a situation, but more often they act based on various interpretations of these facts, or opinions. So, it figures that people have different ways of approaching subjects.
Weber came to the conclusion that we cannot understand social reality unless we understand the meanings or interpretations that people use. In addition, Weber suggested a way to analyze human behavior and social reality by using ideal types.
These ideal types can be described as a set of sociological ideas that best capture the essential features of some aspect of social reality, according to the theoretical concerns of the sociologist.
These ideal types are the descriptive features of a social group, like this. Look at these people here. They are a small sampling of a college campus Young Republicans Club. We'll attempt to describe this smaller group using ideal types we've found to be common to other Young Republican groups. Will these ideal types accurately describe this club? You be the judge. Educated, good income, pro-business, family values, conservative, well-groomed, preppy. Well, what do you think?
The last claim made by Weber is that sociology should concern itself with how the individual functions within a social setting.
Weber asked, why do people do what they are told?
Weber's inquiry focused on looking at behavior at the individual level. So, unlike Mr. Durkheim, who says we should focus on groups, Weber says we should study individuals.
Listen, we said this is a complex science. It's also two-sided. Sociology allows for the study of either the group or the individual. On the one hand, Durkheim argued that we should be looking at social groups and social facts. But on the other hand of sociological thought, there was Weber, who believed we would accomplish the most by looking at how individuals act and what they say and do.
Weber's point is that there is more to human social experience than social structures, social facts, and groups. We must understand the shared meanings and interpretations that are essential to human behavior.
Weber uses a German word to describe how this research should be done. It was called Verstehen. Verstehen is interpretive understanding. What Weber means by interpretive understanding is that the sociologist ought to be able to walk in another person's shoes.
Okay, now recall the sociological imagination, which was formulated by C. Wright Mills? Well, Verstehen is a lot like that. We've got to be critical with our studies and observations. We must be able to place ourselves in another's shoes and not let our biases get in the way.
Hello, world. My name is Hugh. For the remainder of this video, I'll be your token Anglo-Saxon well-groomed rustic male. At this juncture, I'd like to share with you some of my studies. Let us discuss the nature of the bias. Say you are on an expedition to the jungles of New York to study the mating habits of the Puncus erectus. You are definitely not of the particular social group which you observe, and you personally find the female version of this group quite ghastly. Anyway, you shall accept that in this social group which you are studying, this particular look worn by these particular females is considered to be comparable to goddess material in the eyes of the Puncus erectus men. I think those are the men. So according to Weber and Verstehen, your biases of what is and isn't attractive cannot cloud the fact that the way these women look is the ideal type of this sociological group.
The next trip we're going to make is with Mr. George Herbert Mead. Mr. Mead is responsible for giving us symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionism.
George Herbert Mead formulated this perspective, a set of assumptions that guide thinking and research, in order to explain a bunch of stuff about micro-level social relations. And remember, micro-level relations are those that are more personal, like family relations and work relations, or the relations between children in a playground. So how does symbolic interactionism explain these type of relations?
Okay, this is what symbolic interactionism is saying. Stuff like symbols and language and interaction between individuals are responsible for shaping both the individuals and society as a whole.
And then there's Talcott Parsons, perhaps one of the best-known theorists of functional analysis, one of those 1960s Chicago school brains. Groovy, huh? Parsons was a supporter of the functionalist approach for understanding social reality.
Functionalism is a macro-level perspective because it looks at society as a whole. Again, perspective is a set of assumptions that guides thinking and research. The functionalist perspective attempts to explain human relations within society in terms of the roles of individuals, groups, and institutions.
Hey, remember Durkheim? No? He's the guy who says that sociology is best tackled by studying groups and social facts. Well, by using some of Durkheim's insights as a starting point, Parsons believed that 1. Groups and individuals and institutions determine the structure of social relations, and 2. The balance of the roles of each of these parts, groups, individuals, and institutions, makes a society stable. Sounds a bit like Durkheim's organic solidarity on a macro level, doesn't it? Of course it does.
So Parsons' functional theory states that all parts of society, from the individual to the institution, have distinct roles that function to make society stable. Every time roles change, the face of society changes, sometimes for the better, and sometimes for the worse. How's about a little example?
Parsons' functional analysis of the U.S. family in the 1950s emphasized the division of labor between husband and wife, which he saw as necessary for family stability and social order. This model portrayed the husband as the family's representative to the world of work, whereas the wife provided emotional support to the family unit. However, when we look at today's pool of husbands and wives, we find that many women have entered the workforce and have changed the role of the wife. So, according to Parsons' theory, if women's roles change, this will cause a change in family life.
The last brain we'll be picking is that of Robert K. Merton. Merton was also a functionalist. He believed that there are 2 different kinds of functions that affect society.
Function numero uno is called the manifest function. Manifest function refers to outcomes that were intended by someone, like goals or objectives. Function numero dos is called the latent function. Latent function refers to consequences that were unintended, therefore not anticipated.
Merton also pointed out that not all functions are good functions. Manifest or latent functions can be both good and bad. When a function is bad, it's called a dysfunction.
Dysfunction is an outcome that actually weakens the social structure. A dysfunction can undermine social cohesion, social solidarity. For example, consider the institution of family. Strains such as money worries placed upon husbands and wives may cause conflicts that weaken this group's social structure.
Keep in mind that many of the ideas we've just mentioned, like symbolic interactionism and functionalism, are very important concepts that will be popping up again and again for the rest of your sociological career. We just wanted to give you a brief overview of the founders of sociological thought before we get into the grittiness of the subject.
So the last 4 sociological figures we've discussed are Max Weber, George Herbert Mead, Talcott Parsons, and Robert K. Merton.
Max Weber put forth 4 large claims. First, he asserted that there are 2 different aspects to social reality, objective and subjective. Second, that it is useful to develop ideal types to study social reality. Third, that we must understand the meanings that people use in order to understand social relations. And fourth, that we can use an approach called Verstehen in order to study subjective social reality.
George Herbert Mead is the sociologist responsible for giving us symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionism says that things like symbols and language and interaction between individuals are responsible for shaping both individuals and society as a whole.
Talcott Parsons was a functionalist. Functionalism is a macro-level paradigm which attempts to explain relations within society in terms of the stability and the changes of the roles of individuals, groups, and institutions. Parsons believed, 1, that groups and individuals and institutions determine the structure of social relations, and 2, the balance of the roles of each of these parts, groups, individuals, and institutions, makes a society stable.
Lastly, Robert K. Merton, also a functionalist, believed that social structures have 2 functions, or consequences. The first function is the manifest or intended functions. The second function is the latent or unintended functions. Merton also explained that functions could be good or bad. Bad functions are dysfunctions. And that's the last of our sociological brainiacs.
Section C, main series.
Okay, let's keep this educational vibe flowing by looking at the most influential and utilized sociological perspectives or theories. 1, functionalism. 2, conflict theory. And 3, symbolic interactionism. You probably already recognize all 3 theories from our discussions on Parsons, Marx, and Mead.
Theory 1. Functionalism.
Functionalism is a macro-level perspective which attempts to explain relationships within society in terms of the relationships among individuals, groups, and institutions, and the consequences of these relationships.
Society is made up of many, many different parts. Each of these parts is important, and each part has a different function. For example, the economy is a part of society which organizes ways individuals within society can make a living. The economy includes smaller parts like bosses, salaries, jobs, and retirement. All the various parts of society together form the organism of society.
Remember, we said our society has different institutions, like religious institutions, political institutions, economic institutions, educational institutions, and small institutions like families and friends.
And besides institutions, our society is made up of lots of different people who form specific populations and social groups. There are the well-educated professionals, the sports fanatics, the blue-collar workers, the artsy types, the sorority sisters, the vegans, the dart club members, and the deadheads. All of these people and all of the institutions mentioned have different functions and make up our society.
Hence, functionalism concentrates on how each part of society fits with the rest, what each part of society does, and how, if a part of society's functions were to change, this change would affect the rest of society's special little parts.
If society's pool of manual labor jobs were to suddenly shrink, millions of blue-collar workers would need to find jobs. So how do these workers find jobs if there aren't any available? Well, because this part of society is suddenly gone, another part of society must compensate for that change.
This shift in economy may be offset by changes in education. More people decide to get training beyond high school or go to college so that they'll have better jobs. Or more members of the family get jobs because dad has been laid off. The loss of manual labor jobs may mean those out of work are less qualified for other positions in society. So to make up for this, the government develops a job training program or provides tax incentives for industries to retrain workers. The point? Other parts of society change in response to the original change, and the functional balance is maintained. And that's the theory of functionalism.
Theory 2. Conflict theory.
The second theory of sociology is the conflict theory. The social conflict theory goes a little like this. The organization of society and the changes in society can be explained by the conflicts inherent in many social relations.
Think of the conflict theory this way. Remember what social groups are? There are countless social groups in society, and each has its own interests. In fact, the interests of one social group may conflict with those of another. Let's get a more concrete concept of conflict theory and see how it may be applied to our understanding of the macro level of society.
We'll take Karl Marx's 2 social classes, the capitalists and the proletarians. The capitalist interests lie in making money through profits from the businesses which they own and manage. Now, the proletarians' interests lie in their own well-being and their ability to make enough wages to take care of themselves and their families.
But there's a conflict here. If a capitalist wishes to make lots of money in a company, expenses have to be minimal. This may mean giving the workers the lowest wages possible. On top of that, the company will also want high output and thus will attempt to get the most out of their workers. This may mean long hours on the job and little vacation time.
So the conflict is that the workers want good wages and reasonable hours, but the business owners and managers want high output and low costs. This is just one of many examples of conflict which exist in American society.
Theory 3. Symbolic interactionism.
Symbolic interactionism is the third main perspective in the field of sociology. Remember, we discussed this perspective briefly during our discussion of George Herbert Mead. But let's get a little bit more nitty-gritty here.
Symbolic interactionism is the sociological theory or perspective which asserts that the self and society are built through interactions based on symbols and language.
We know that symbols are things that represent something to a human being. A symbol can be a word from a language, a nonverbal gesture like a smile, or a picture. People use symbols to communicate, and symbols may mean different things to different people in our culture and across cultures.
So, humans use symbols to interact. Interactions between individuals build groups. Groups make up society. So, in other words, society is the product of the meanings that people give to their situations. Symbolic interactionism asserts that the understanding of symbols makes a social being, and social beings interact to create a society.